It all began in the 17th century when capitalism expanded into the first uncharted territory, the high seas. The European states were competing for ownership of trade routes. To impose their own rules, they created monopolies called the East India Companies. The Dutch version, known as the VOC, was designed to rule over the trade routes the Dutch had discovered. For the Dutch, both competing companies and indigenous merchants were considered pirates. But why? From the state's point of view, anyone not respecting the standards imposed by the ruler is a pirate. So piracy is a matter of perspective, and those in power tend to impose their own perspective on the rest of the world. That's why the Dutch government saw nothing wrong when in 1603 a Dutch admiral attacked a Portuguese ship along the spice route. In fact, the Dutch government had sanctioned the attack by providing a letter of marque and reprisal. Those given this authority were known as privateers or corsairs. So what the Portuguese considered an act of piracy was for the Dutch a valiant move in forcing control of a sea route they claimed to own. Many pirates believed the high seas to be a public good, to be used freely for the benefit of everyone. But in uncharted territories, it is unclear who the legitimate owners are and who the pirates are. Stories of pirates are not unique to Hollywood tales of a bygone era. History repeats itself whenever capitalism expands into uncharted territory, and that includes cyber and outer space. So Johnny Depp won't be out of work anytime soon. In the early 20th century, the British government created a monopoly to enforce rules in the latest capitalist territory, the airwaves, and the BBC was born. Its purpose was to create rules for programmers and for listeners, such as allowing only religious shows and classical music. His Majesty's subjects were to listen to the broadcasts in silence, using only BBC-approved receivers. But the popularity of offshore pirate radio made the government rethink the rules of broadcasting. And since the end of the BBC's monopoly in 1967, the airwaves have been free of censorship and treated as a public good. The funny thing is, every time capitalism expands into new territories, state monopolies are used to define the rules and gain control. Or did you actually believe that capitalism and free markets were one and the same thing? Today, the issue of net neutrality in cyberspace echoes the struggles for freedom of the seas and freedom of the airwaves. Remember the Dutch corsairs attacking the Portuguese ship? Well, in 2001, the Chinese government authorized 10,000 cyber pirates turned cyber corsairs to attack American targets in reprisal for a US drone intrusion. Since then, both the US and China have been tracking cyber pirates online to offer them jobs as cyber corsairs. Using cyber weapons such as the Stuxnet and flame viruses, cyber corsairs fight for control over cyberspace, a strategic territory on which so many industries depend. So ask yourself, who shall we trust to control cyberspace? A for-profit like Google, sometimes backed by the NSA? A non-profit like ICANN, supported by the US government? Or a collective of stateless cyber activists like Anonymous? Clearly, we owe multiple pirate organizations for their view of the sea as a common good, for unleashing free radio broadcasting, and for defending net neutrality. Some say that sea pirates were the only ones accepting women on board in the 17th century. Thank you, guys. But the story is not over. Capitalism has entered a new age of expansion, and gene maps and outer space are the new uncharted territories of the 21st century. Who will you trust to control them?
And basically, it's the illegal use or distribution of software protected under intellectual property laws. Now you can get movies that have just released in theaters right now, today. I mean, if you just go onto whatever website that is your movie watching website, because everybody has one, you just go ahead and type in, oh, Marvel Avengers 2 or whatever, and now you're watching it.
Sure. Our computer club got very interested in these upcoming computers, and then it became aware that there was a basic language, a computer language that would run on these small, low-cost computers that you build yourself, and then you have to spend a lot of money to buy enough memory to run a programming language and to buy a teletype to type your stuff on. You have to spend several times the cost of a car, but then you could run. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had written a BASIC, came on a big paper tape reel, and you read it in on a teletype machine. It would get into the memory of the computer, and then it could run programs. You could type in a game out of a book of games written in the BASIC language, type in the game, and play it on the computer. This was a goal of probably every one of the 500 of us in the Homebrew Computer Club, was to get to the point that we could play games on our own computer. And Bill Gates became a little bit famous and well known for this software going around. Well, we had one copy of the tape that our club library had purchased. And one member of the club, Dan Sokol actually, took that tape and borrowed it for 2 weeks. And when he came back, he brought back like 4 copies. He just copied the paper tape at his company, AMI. And he brought him back and he said, the new rule is anytime you take something from the club library, you have to return at least that many copies. And it's kind of funny. And we got a letter from Bill Gates all upset, copyright, you're copying software and you shouldn't. And I agree. I agree with that, which is the digital age unearthed the ability to copy things for no cost. There were times I remember times in, like I was taught that communist Russia, they weren't allowed to have copy machines, and then all of a sudden we started trying to ban copying of anything over here. And it's just a problem. How do you solve it? In the long term, it's almost like huge forces of nature that you cannot turn back. Huge hurricanes of force. Eventually, it's going to be so easy to copy things that their value, their cost, what people will pay has got to go down. It just has to eventually. The laws are trying to hold it out. I notice that every court case to this day tends to side with copyright holders, and you cannot have for free. And I have a lot of friends that are musicians. They are creators of the world. They're like writers. And how do you imagine a writer writing a book? How are they going to get paid if everyone copies it for free? Look at the royalties. So many of my musician friends, their royalties have just dropped and dropped and dropped. People are still getting their music more than ever before, but they're not paying.
Millions of viewers have paid to watch the international TV hit Game of Thrones, but last year millions more watched it illegally by logging on to pirate file-sharing websites. 5 years after authorities shut down Kim.com's operation, the business of online video and music piracy is still going strong. They thrive on websites accessed through the Tor network, a group of volunteer-run servers which enable anonymous communication.
Most people don't realize is that when you're on Tor, you can type in normal addresses, and it still obfuscates your location and your IP address.
Right. According to a recent survey, there are more than 850 pirate sites, with 50 new ones launching every month.
Now that it's so easy to buy a little card and put 500 movies on, one little card that you can plug into a camera if you want, it's very difficult. When one time in my office, a gentleman came in, on this whole copyright issue. A gentleman came in and I was talking about, my gosh, you could almost get to the point you could put a movie on a card. He said, oh, someday you'll have a card and you'll have 500 movies on it. And I thought, that changes life as we know it. It changes the rules. If I have a card that's bits, ones and zeros, and I give you those ones and zeros, the digital age says a song is no longer music. A song is a collection of a billion numbers. If I give you those billion numbers, you've got it. It's so easy. Our computer technology lets us copy everything instantly. No, it's very scary. It means a new world. A new world's ahead. And it may take decades. It may even take centuries before we actually get to the final ending point. Because, people are used to the old ways, and you always want to keep a little bit of the old. And the old is everything was too complicated for an individual person to make all the copies in the world of. You sell them a record and on vinyl, and they've got that one record. It only stays in one record. I mean, they could loan it to a friend and get it back, but it's pretty much, one record. Now, all of a sudden, you give out a song, and it could be 10,000, 100,000, 1 million copies, just distributed that instantly. The cost of production used to regulate this industry, some industries that are based on information, meaning everything like music, books, newspapers, and movies. All these industries are having severe problems today already, and it's just been, what has it been? Like a decade and a half.